In today's Gospel, we see the stark contrast between the humble confidence of Christ and the arrogant insecurity of the Pharisees. Today's Gospel starts with people who seem confused about whether or not Jesus really is the Messiah, and they talk about the fact that isn't the Messiah supposed to come from Bethlehem, and isn't he supposed to be from the lineage of King David? Now, of course, both of those things are actually true of Jesus. His family does trace its heritage right back to King David, and he was born at Bethlehem, but clearly people don't seem to understand these two important points. What that would seem to indicate is that Christ was not wandering around wherever he went, trumpeting these attributes that made him qualified to be the Messiah. It indicates that Christ was simply getting on with the work in a humble and confident kind of way that God had given him to do. This mission that had been given to him by the Father, he just gets on with it. He doesn't wander around just trumpeting his attributes. He's actually getting on in this quietly confident and humble way with what he's called to do. And that's the model that we are all called to follow as well, that regardless of what obstacles we might face, and particularly what other people might think about us, if God has called us to do something, we need to, in humbleness and quiet confidence, just get on with that calling in our lives. Now, we contrast that with the Pharisees and what we see going on in today's gospel, and it really is quite astounding when you think about it. There is this arrogance and this pride on display like we don't often see from the Pharisees. They are disdaining, they are talking down their nose about the ordinary everyday people who can actually see that Jesus really is the Messiah, and they refer to them as rabble. They talk about the fact that they are uneducated, and they even say that they are damned. It's absolutely astounding. And one of the key points here is they're not really disputing Jesus on theological points at all. They are simply basing this judgment in today's gospel on where they think he comes from. They, once again, also don't seem to understand that he was born in Bethlehem, and they think he comes from Galilee. And their whole premise today is that how can any prophet come from Galilee? God could never use someone from Galilee. They just can't believe that that could happen. Now, that's really astounding when you think about the fact that these are men who are leaders in the Jewish tradition, which has includes God working as a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud. It includes all of those wondrous deeds that were done in Egypt, all of the amazing things that happened in captivity. And yet here they are saying that something as simple as a prophet coming from Galilee is totally impossible for God. It really is quite astounding how disconnected they have become from the God that they actually claim to worship and to understand. Today's contrast we see in the gospel is the contrast that plays out, or the temptation that plays out in our life every day. And the challenge for us is to be more like Christ, to have that humble confidence to get on with what he has called us to do, and not to worry about what others think, as opposed to that prideful arrogance and that insecurity where we would look down our nose at others and the way in which God might be working, and we would be tempted to say, well, no, God could never work like that, because we have an idea in our mind, a very fixed, square idea of how we think God should be at work. And the challenge, of course, is to be open to God's leading and working wherever and however it comes into our lives, and to also be about quietly and confidently, with humility, getting on with the call, the work, the mission that Christ has given to each and every one of us. Today's saint quote of the day comes from Saint Catherine Laboure, and she said this: "One must see God in everyone." To me, this simple little quote really sums up the major failing of the Pharisees today. They are so caught up in this haze of arrogance and pride and passing judgment that they're just obsessed now with the peripheries. They don't see the most important thing of all. They don't see God in their midst. But that temptation and that challenge is something that all of us fall into, and we can fall into it very, very easily. It can be very tempting to read scriptures like today's and to think that, oh, well, I would never be like the Pharisees, those evil men. Thank goodness I'm not like them. In actual fact, we are all like the Pharisees. It's a temptation we all need to fight. It's very easy to look at other people and to see their sins, their failings, their weaknesses, the things that really irk us about them, to see all of the peripheries and perhaps even struggle to believe that God would want to work, would want to call such people. But the one most important thing in all of that haze of judgment we forget is that God is calling them, that God is at work in their life as well, that they are made in the image and likeness of God, and that God loves them just as much and just as profoundly as he loves each and every one of us.